It's being hailed as a pivotal moment for Europe. EU leaders' agreement on a €750 billion corona recovery package. After a marathon 4 nights of heated negotiations, the leaders struck a deal to provide €390 billion in grants and another 360 in low-interest loans to member states hardest hit by the pandemic. It'll be financed by collective borrowing, a paradigm shift for the EU. Will the deal hold the Eurozone together, or have member states simply papered over the cracks in Europe's foundations? Corona recovery deal, can the EU rebound? That's our title. And it's a pleasure to welcome our guests. Erik Kirschbaum is an American journalist who has written for the Los Angeles Times, amongst other media outlets. And he says the summit exposed once again how much disunity there is in the European Union. And we're very glad to have with us Paweł Tokarski. He is a Polish economist and senior associate at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. He says we must reform the member states now, or we'll face the same problems again with less time and fewer instruments. And great to have with us once again Cerstin Gammelin. She is Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Parliamentary Bureau of the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. And she says the deal is far from perfect, but it is a signal that multilateralism is still alive. And let me start with you, Cerstin, and ask for your take on the big picture. There are a lot of superlatives being thrown around here. A historic, a breakthrough, Chancellor Merkel saying it's a huge step for the EU. Would you agree with all that?
I would say yes, it's a huge step forward for Germany and also for the EU, because Germany basically changed mind in giving out grants instead of loans. But I'm not with all these people that are saying it's now a historic moment, because I think history is written from the past, or from the future. So historians will have to judge whether that was historic. For the moment now, it is big.
Paweł, how would you see it?
As an economist, I see it as the most significant moment in the European economic integration since the creation of the euro. Because so far we had financial assistance which consisted of loans. Now we have grants, and those grants are quite substantial. It's something around 750 billion euros. However, from the economic perspective for now, I think that the most important is what the ECB is doing, how long it will be able to stabilize the bond market.
Thank you very much, and we'll come back to that point a little bit later on. Erik, how would you come down on this? Historic or less so? What we just heard from Paweł indicates it is indeed a very, very big step. How do you see it?
Well, the mutualization of debt for the first time is a big, big step. It's something that was long overdue. The EU could have done this a decade ago. The Eurozone crisis might not have been as severe as it was. But on the other hand, 5 days and 5 nights of negotiations for this deal that could have been done in a day is a bit of a farce. And it just showed the EU is far from united. And with the problems facing the EU and facing the world, it's not really making them very fit for the future when they take 5 days to get a decision like this done.
If I may say that, I mean, the EU is united, otherwise you would not have a deal. I mean, I agree with you, it was very, very difficult, and 5 days and 4 nights to negotiate.
But small states...
But I'm sorry, but the end, there's a deal.
Right, but small states blackmailed everybody else.
And look at other countries in the world, they never managed to make a deal. And here's a deal made by 27 national member states.
One last big picture question to you, Paweł, before we take a look at some of the details of this deal. It was a compromise, as both essentially have conceded, with significant trade-offs made by pretty much all interested parties. The question is whether the result justifies those concessions.
Of course, this justifies the concessions, and we have to bear in mind that we have in the EU 27 different member states with different size, with different economic systems. And for some of these member states, it's really a huge step forward, like for the Netherlands or for Sweden, to guarantee the common debt, to common transfers which will go to the south. So this is a huge step forward, which nobody in those countries expected, and the politicians of these countries will have to face criticism at home.
So let us, in fact, now take a closer look at the Corona recovery package and those north-south divisions that it provoked.
It was clear there'd be a fight over the €750 billion recovery fund, and it exposed deep rifts within the EU. Countries like Italy and Spain, who've been especially hard hit by the corona pandemic, worked hard to counter resistance from countries like the Netherlands and Austria that would prefer to save money. After marathon negotiations, they reduced the amount of direct aid to €390 billion. For the first time, the EU will issue common debt. Despite all the haggling, the current president of the EU Council was pleased.
I think this is a clear signal that goes beyond Europe, that this very special structure, this very special entity, the European Union, consists of 27 member states that can act together despite their very different backgrounds and that have proven they have the capacity to act. That is a good sign.
But what is the deal actually worth?
Erik, you talked in your opening statement about the disunity exposed by this deal. In fact, there were moments where it looked, as you said, over a course of 5 days, as if there might not be a deal. Would you say those north-south divisions will leave lasting scars?
Absolutely. It's not just north-south now, it's east-west. We saw small groups of Eastern European countries able to blackmail their interests. We saw the small frugals able to force their interests through. The EU used to be led by France and Germany kind of leading the way, and now people are getting away with, in the wake of Britain leaving the EU, smaller countries are coming up with their special interests. And it's a scary moment if you think the way the world's going with China and the United States, these big power blocks, and the EU here in the middle with 27 countries haggling over small little details. Is the EU going to be able to compete with these big countries in the world of the future?
Cerstin Gammelin.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, but it's totally different, actually, what I see. This is the proof that liberalism is still alive. I mean, 27 member states make a deal. And it's sure, it took a very long time, and we still have this division between South and North and East and West, sure. But, I mean, the special situation here was that normally, until March, Germany was in one line with the Netherlands, Austria, and these little countries that say they are frugal. So actually, Germany was the leader in saying austerity. And after that crisis, suddenly, there was a change in German politics, and a big change. So Germany stepped away from austerity and went to France again. And then they had this strong French-German motor that basically came out with this proposal to deliver 500 billion in grants. And this was a big change, I mean.
We were, in fact, told by the German press, at least, that the Chancellor seemed to be favouring the colours of the tricolore, the French red, white and blue.
Yeah.
Would you say that there is a lasting change here to the balance of power in Europe, in part due to Chancellor Merkel's decision to go to the other side?
I mean, we see clearly that what it means that Great Britain is not here anymore, because Great Britain was also balancing as a big power the European decisions. And I would not be sure that there's a permanent shift now from Germany to the side of the southern countries or the southern big countries. But at the other side, I would say there is no alternative, really. What should Germany do? I mean, there are four big economies now left over in the European Union, and they have to stay together. Otherwise, the European internal market, which is, by the way, the biggest in the world, will break away.
Paweł, let's talk a bit about some of the economic details of the situation in which Europe finds itself. Before the countries went into the summit, the leaders went into the summit, there was a lot of talk about the Eurozone's survival being at stake, largely because of the divergence between northern and southern economies. If we look at the current numbers, Germany, the Netherlands, it looks like they're going to see an economic contraction this year of around 6.5%. Spain and Italy are almost double that. So will this deal now close that gap The head of the European Central Bank has said that gap is putting the very survival of the euro in danger. Do you think the deal will get money to those southern countries in such a way and quickly enough that it can close that divergence?
I fully agree that the divergence not only in the euro area, but especially at the single market is a very, very bad thing. And what changed the minds of the leader at the summit, I think, it was the threat about the integrity of the single market. That some countries after Corona crisis will be actually developing badly, and then the populists in those countries can actually change the political lines of those countries. So the economic divergence can cause social divergence, and social divergence can have a very negative impact on the political unity of the Union. And I think that all the leaders understood it very well, and that's why we have this decision at the summit.
So let me ask you this, Erik. The dire economic prospects that are facing those southern European countries are not only, of course, due to Corona. There were macroeconomic weaknesses in Spain and Italy and elsewhere that preceded the crisis. The Frugal Four were determined to make sure that this recovery package essentially helps to remedy those macroeconomic weaknesses by imposing what's called conditionality. Do you think that we will see true reform on the basis of this deal?
I think they have to, and I think the reason Germany switched sides and was suddenly in favor of collectivizing the debt is because Merkel realized the Corona is a one-time thing. It's an exceptional circumstance. The problems with Corona is not only because of the economic problems they're having before, and she also realized piling more debt on these southern states was going to drive them into really dire straits. So this is a one-off, perhaps, we'll see. But I think Merkel also realized it was the right thing to do, and there will be controls now. The Netherlands pushed this through, that they will control with the conditionality to make sure the money is being spent on things to help mitigate the impact of Corona. So if you're a frugal person, you have to say, well, okay, we'll see how this works. Not a bad deal, could have been better, but at least this will go for Corona-related issues. Next year, Merkel will be gone. It's unlikely another conservative chancellor will do this again. So I do think this is a one-off. This will be limited to the Corona crisis. And hopefully the money will go to the right places in these countries to help them overcome the Corona crisis.
Cerstin, one of the points of criticism for some observers, it's what they're calling the governance architecture of this deal, meaning those conditions that I mentioned that are supposed to ensure reform in the southern European economies, that they're going to be essentially overseen by other EU leaders, not by the institutions in Brussels, but by the European Council itself. Isn't that a recipe for ongoing divisions and delays?
Sure it is, I must say, because it is actually impossible that a different member states can tell the parliament in a different country what kind of budget they have to do and what kind of reforms they have to do. I mean, in the European Union, all member states are sovereign national states, and it's actually impossible that another sovereign state can tell you what to do. On the other hand, and I think that was the reason why they had to find a compromise. I mean, taxpayers from all national states are guaranteeing these grants, and so the debt is a common debt in a way, and that means also the German taxpayers or the taxpayers from the Netherlands want to make sure that the money that is now on the table will be spent on the right way, and I think there is also a common understanding that there has to be a kind of control.
Paweł, your opening statement referred to the need for reform in member states. Do you think this conditionality is going to do the job?
I don't know. It's difficult to say because we will have an extreme time pressure. The member states will have to prepare programs to get the money in a very short time. And those programs will be assessed by the European Commission and then by the member states. So it's difficult to say what kind of quality of this project will be and where the money will be spent. And knowing the institutional deficiencies in the southern European countries, that it's going to be a challenge.
Let me come to a different point. All of you have mentioned the provisions for common debt. Basically, the idea is that much of this recovery package will be financed by borrowing on the financial markets by the European Union Commission. Now, when that proposal was first made, Erik, Olaf Scholz, the German finance minister, referred to it, or essentially made the analogy to the so-called Hamiltonian moment. For you and me, as Americans, I think a lot of us know about that moment because of the musical Hamilton, but let me just remind our visitors. It was the moment in 1790 when the very first Treasury Secretary of the United States persuaded those nascent American states, still very young, to accept common debt. That essentially was the first step toward U.S. fiscal integration, which has made the U.S. an absolute powerhouse, also on international financial markets. Is the same thing happening here?
No. This is a very, very small step in the right direction, but a small step and way too late. That was 1790, and the United States was able to flourish and blossom because of that promise and the promise to pay back all that debt. The United States has always paid back on the money it's borrowed, and that's why the U.S. is such a great creditor. And the EU has been hemming and hawing about this question for 2 decades now. The euro's been around for 20 years, but there's no collective debt. And that's the fundamental flaw, the fundamental weakness of the euro. And they knew about this 10 years ago when the Eurozone crisis flared out. They've been talking about it ever since. And now they're taking a small, very baby step towards the Hamiltonian moment. Hopefully it will be something that will give the euro some power, but I'm skeptical. I doubt it's more than a one-off.
Cerstin, the Hamiltonian moment, if I could just say this, the Hamiltonian moment wasn't actually a moment. It was a process of fiscal integration that went on over decades and is still not finished in the U.S.
Yeah, and I think the first step was introducing of the euro, and now we have the second step of starting with a common debt. And I think we have to take a decision, or Europe has to take the decision, whether they will continue in that way, and also the next chancellor, whoever that will be. Perhaps it's a green one, you never know. Huh? But we have to decide, do we go straight on this way or do we stop? And then we have to give up also this common currency. I think we are here at the point where they have to take a decision which way.
Paweł, can I get you to weigh in very quickly on the common debt issue?
Quickly. I would like to remind that it's not the first time that the EU is issuing debt. The EU was issuing debt for the last 10 years. But
it's going to be the biggest debt the EU ever issued.
It was only in small amounts and it was only for loans. And now it will be for the first time that is issuing debt for grants. So this is new. And the question is if the conditionality of that will be strong enough for the leaders in Southern Europe to actually use this money properly. Because for some of them, it will be the last chance to reform the countries. There will be no second chance.
So a lot riding on this, and a lot riding on another aspect of the deal as well. It wasn't only North-South tensions over frugality that nearly torpedoed the negotiations at the summit. So too did East-West divisions over linking EU funding to recipient countries' compliance with European principles on democratic values and rule of law. Here's more.
The text that has been agreed on the rule of law has improved. It's a very clear in the document, a very clear commitment to the rule of law and a very clear commitment to the protection of the financial interests of the Union.
And any attempt which tried to make a connection between rule and law and budget was hacked, was successfully rejected.
So, Cerstin, pretty contradictory assertions there. Ursula von der Leyen and Viktor Orbán. Who's right?
Yeah, basically everybody did win, because we have a clause now in this statement of the summit that says, OK, we have to put the paying to the rule of law, to fulfilling the rule of law. But there is a little second sentence which says, OK, but the member states have to decide. So basically, Ursula von der Leyen is right by saying, OK, we dedicated our money to guarantee that the states which will get the money will be in line with the rule of law. But there's also some truth to Orbán, which is saying we rejected it, but he can veto such a decision.
Let me ask you, Paweł, again, your opening statement talked about the need for reform and also your concern about whether there are enough instruments in the toolbox of the EU to compel reform. Now, your own country, Poland, has been under ongoing pressure from Brussels for its effort to undermine the independence of the judiciary. Will this deal change anything?
I don't think that it will change anything. Unfortunately, the EU has no real instruments to influence countries like Poland and Hungary. And the EU budget, EU finances are unfortunately a weak instrument to do that. In the last EU budget, in the last financial framework, we had a similar instrument, so-called macroeconomic conditionality, to influence the economic policies of member states, and it proved to be actually toothless. So I don't think that during the next 3 years, the EU will be managed to stop Jarosław Kaczyński to further destroy the Polish institutions.
Let me just follow up on that. There are also currently legal proceedings ongoing with European Union member countries that have not complied with EU rule of law, and those are not yet resolved. Taken together, if they were resolved against the countries, if they were found not to be in compliance, together with what is at least now a principle of linkage in this deal, could that start to change things?
I don't think the current government in Poland is really making 2 steps forwards on the way to destruction of the rule of law and 1 step backwards when the pressure from the Brussels is really high. And now, again, the president of the ruling party won the elections, and Kaczyński has a full power in Poland, and he can do everything he wants with the judiciary. And unfortunately, the next step will be the Polish independent media.
Erik, you haven't been overly optimistic so far about the agreement. Would you differ with that analysis, or do you also think that this is toothless?
I think it's a nightmare that these Eastern European countries were able to water down things, and countries that are trampling on status of rule of law, limiting press freedom, limiting judicial freedom. It's a worrisome development, and they got away with it. And you know, how can everybody there be a winner? How can all 27 countries walk away as winners? I don't get it. There's always a winner and there's a loser, but they all claim to be winners at the EU summit.
If I can, a very easy example, if you imagine 27 families are living in a big house with 27 apartments, so everybody that owns an apartment has his own problems. So the Eastern Europeans have, I don't know, problems with the window. On top, they have problems with the sun and the balconies, and on the basements, they have also problems, I don't know, with the water coming in. And everybody's saying, oh, this is my biggest problem here. And so at the end, the 27 owners of these apartments in the big European house agreed on a plan which is dedicated to fix the whole house. Whether it will happen or not is a different question. But this plan basically helps to fix the house, and in that way everybody can be a winner because everybody can still live in that house.
But one of those owners can block the whole thing, and that's the whole weakness.
No, but so far not, because everybody of the 7 signed this agreement after 5 days and nights.
One could block the whole thing.
Let me ask you, for me as a lawyer, this is a vague provision, I grant that, on the conditionality relating to rule of law, yet it is now in a document that will have a certain legal value going forward. Does that not establish some kind of lever that could perhaps be strengthened over time?
Could be that exactly that will happen. But we have to see that. I mean, I think that was the best deal they could get out. It's not ideal, far from ideal, but it is a deal, and perhaps it will help. And perhaps if the water is draining in, they will do more.
Paweł, this deal still has to be approved by the EU Parliament. Do you think we'll see any changes?
I don't think that we need any changes because the Polish government needs desperately this money. The situation with the public finances is very bad. So they will be very happy to receive this 160 billion euros.
So, very briefly, I want to come back to our title. The question was, will this help the EU rebound? Cerstin gave us the great analogy of the common house. Would you say the foundations are at all stronger due to this deal?
Yeah, the collectivization of debt was a big step forward, and that's something to cheer about.
Cerstin?
They still have to work on the house, huh?
I'm not going to let you get out of the question altogether. Is the EU more resilient?
I mean, now the result of that summit is that the EU is still existing. That is the result. Whether it's more resilient, we will see.
Paweł?
From the economic perspective, it's definitely more resilient. We have the ECB intervention, we have still huge national package, and now this on the top, the EU package, which makes the possible economic crisis or debt crisis not really probable.
It's often said by EU leaders that it's time for Europe to speak with a common voice and to play a stronger role in the world. Does this deal help it at all to do that?
Well, when the EU is getting economically stronger, then definitely it will have a stronger voice, and also the issuing common debt will also increase the international importance of the common currency. So this is also very crucial for the EU.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us for this discussion. Thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon.